there's no doubt that there can be an element of exploitation in any social system, and there's no doubt that social systems are hierarchical, so that there are people on the top and people on the bottom. But in human society, there's lots of dominance hierarchies. There's not just one. And we value lots of different things from people. And it's by no means obvious that the dominance hierarchies were set up consciously through conscious thought by any group of people over any span of time for any purpose whatsoever. It's particularly obvious when you also understand that, well, we are not the only things that have dominance hierarchies. Chimps have them, wolves have them. That's why you can have a pet dog. You understand a dog. You know, it doesn't even want to be the boss in the house. That's a nervous and upset dog. It wants to have its position as a valued, low-level entity in the dominance hierarchy, and a dog is just absolutely happy when that happens. So, you know, because what is a dog going to do? Buy groceries? It's like, no, it's not. So it has to be low in the dominance hierarchy because it doesn't have the competence. And one of the things that's very, very bizarre about Marxist and postmodernist thinking is that there doesn't seem to be any recognition that dominance hierarchies are often structured based on competence, not on like arbitrary distribution of power. I mean, if you want to go have your appendix out, what are you going to look for? Are you going to look for the most powerful doctor? Or are you going to look for the most competent doctor? Well, you hope that there's a rough relationship between power and status and competence, right? Because otherwise, how are you going to figure it out? But if it's a good hierarchy, it's based on competence, not on arbitrary power. So we might say that when a dominance hierarchy starts to be based on arbitrary power or purely on economic terms, then it's actually turned into a tyranny. It's no longer a functional hierarchy. It's already stultified and twisted into a form that can't be sustained. And then people are going to get upset about that and start talking about it, or worse, they're going to start doing things that are quite disruptive. But the idea that the hierarchical structure per se is pathological, or that it's consciously imposed, or that it's not necessary, or that it has nothing to do with competence, it's like, no, that better not be the case, because we would be in serious trouble if it was the case. So I would say the more functional the society, the more the power hierarchy is based on competence in relationship to what the society deems as actually valuable. Now, obviously no society meets those criteria perfectly, because you can't. It's part of a dialogue and a continual processing of information, you know, so you can't hit the target, it's always moving. But you can hope that the dialogue continues. So here's a little vision I had of how things work, like a democratic society works, okay? Because people often think if they're conservative, orderly, low in openness, then they think the conservatives are right, and if they're more on the liberal or on the left side, high in openness, low in orderliness, then they think that the left is correct. But the left and the right aren't correct. They represent different systems of values, and the values that they represent are valid sometimes in some situations. And then the question is, well, when and in what situations? And the answer to that is, not only do you not know, you can't tell. And so it's like this. So imagine that people are on a cliff. It's like they're on a flat plateau, and it's a cliff on both sides. And down at the bottom of the cliff is fire and rocks. And so you want to stay on top of that cliff, and it's quite narrow. And there's a line you should walk down, right down the middle, but you can't tell where it is. So what do? You put all the lefties here, and you put all the right-wingers here, and you put a rope between them, and you tie the rope to you. And the right pulls this way, and the left pulls that way, and if they're pulling properly, then you can walk right down the middle. But the only way they can pull properly is if they keep talking to one another. You know, and if the left disappears, then the right pulls everything over the cliff down into the flaming rocks. And if the left disappears, then the right pulls everything off the cliff down onto the rocks. And we know that. And there's been good personality models developed recently. They're not public yet, precisely, that show that if you push a virtue to its extreme, it turns into a vice. And that all the vices basically end up in the same place. Yes?
What would you say happens if both sides are talking a lot but not to one another? Like if there's a lot of preaching to the choir on either side.
Well, it's dysfunction.
Yeah.
It's dysfunction.
Because I was thinking about modern American politics where they can actually show with data that it's increasingly polarized. Like just increasingly left and right subcultures?
Well, what that means is that people can't get along. That's what it means. And you know, you can say, well, part of getting along is following a shared set of rules, and that's true, but the rules are kind of low resolution. But to get along, like you think about your family. If your family is structured so that it's just a bunch of rules and you better damn follow them or there'll be punishment, you know, that can be better than just sheer chaos. But it's not as good as general principles encompassing continual dialogue. That works best. And you know, you might think, well, what are the general principles? And what we'd hope are, well, we can look at what people have done in the past, and we can look at our history and our culture, and we can think, okay, we're going to try not to do the stupid things that people have done in the past that are evidently stupid, like maybe Nazism isn't the way to go, for example. So we're going to try not to do that. We can extract out those general principles, but then we have to talk continually in the present because the present keeps moving around. There's no way of mapping it using a structure from the past. You can only approximate it. You know, it's like, you know, if you took a Google map of Toronto. From 10 years ago, and you said, well, this is the map, it's not going to be updated. It's like you'd have a real rough time driving around the waterfront because you'd keep running into skyscrapers that, you know, aren't supposed to be there. And so the map is obviously useful, but the update process is also unbelievably useful. And you can also say, if you look at left and right, you can roughly say that the left is on the side of update and the right is on the side of structure. And you might say, well, how much update and how much structure? It's like, enough to solve the problem. That's the answer. What's the problem? Keeps changing. How do we keep up? We talk. And part of that also is, like if you're talking, most of you guys are lefties because most of you are open and not very orderly. Now, there's going to be exceptions in here, and you're young because youth is often associated with political beliefs that are more on the left. And I think that's because you're in a more plastic state of development, right? There's still a lot of things open to you. So, but the thing about it is that you have to get along with the right, and that's partly because the right represents what's already there. So how do you do that? Well, that's hard, but the one thing you definitely do is listen. You try to figure out what the hell they're up to, you know, and why, and what they stand for, and the value of that, and where it's too extreme. And it's not easy, but that's why a democracy is a dialogue and not, that's how it regulates itself, is through the dialogue. Okay, so what you're basically trying to do is integrate your abilities, your sub-personalities, which is how I'm going to represent it, into a functional hierarchy. And a functional hierarchy is one where subsidiary parts of the hierarchy don't conflict. So let me give you an example. You can tell me what, and I based this on the Piagetian notion of the equilibrated state. So Piaget had this idea that there's two ways you might be able to run an organization. So say you're moving towards a collectively defined goal. And one would be to put someone at the top of it and kind of give them complete control, tyrannical power. And so that meant you were going to do what that person said or else. Okay. Now the problem with that is that that person isn't always going to be right, and that you're not always going to be happy about doing what they say, and that the fact that you're not happy means you're not going to be as productive, and it also means that the organization is going to have to expend quite a lot of energy keeping you in line.